Around about the time that I got involved with the first generation of digital media, I'd also become a father for the first time. My eldest son, Thomas, was 3 years old, and he was constantly prodding and poking the world, asking questions about how things worked. And late one evening, as we were driving back from summer vacation, I heard his voice from the back of the car ask, "Pop, why do trees go black at night?" And I looked at the horizon, and my initial reaction was to start to explain to him the way that light really worked. And then I looked again, and I realized that he was right. Trees do go black at night. And I'd like you to imagine with me shining a torch into a blackened forest late at night and see the trees just light up. So unencumbered by accepted knowledge, Thomas's direct experience was to see that trees go black as night falls. And I learned something from him that day, which I've taken with me, which is to be open to unexpected insights, wherever they come from, whether they're your own or from other people. Around about the same time, I'd been asked to participate in developing and teaching an interaction design course. And interaction design, even back then, was quite complex and contained many of the elements that you see from this diagram from 2009. And I noticed in this complexity that, and I took an interest in new forms of teaching because I noticed in the complexity that students needed to find new ways of learning and new ways of guidance. And that's really what I tried to do. Now, we're in 1991. Interaction design is still pretty esoteric. There's no internet. And yet the first year of this course had a group of students that were really quite visionary, very aware, and highly passionate and excited even about such a complex subject. And we found that as we gave them assignments, they would massively overproduce and create these metaphors for computers and interfaces and models of the way things were working. And I quickly realized that I couldn't actually teach them. What I needed to do was to facilitate their learning and create a support system for them in believing in their own curiosity, in their own passion, and the products of their own work. And these students couldn't really tell us where they were going, but they definitely knew enough to feel their passion to take them forward towards unknown goals. And that was a second significant learning point for me, that if you feel the passion for what you're doing, you certainly can't know where you're going to get to, but that intuition of being on the right track is going to take you forward. Now, I sympathize with a lot of the company leaders and organizational leaders among you today, because you're going to be hearing a lot about transmedia and the way it's changing the world. We've got some great speakers that are going to be telling you lots of different angles on this story, and I agree with them. And I think I'm right that by the end of the day, you're likely to be feeling something like this. And the big question I think that you're going to take away after you've heard all this great information is, what does it actually mean for you? And what are you going to do with it? Because tomorrow, you're still going to have to focus on business as usual. And the question which I think will be with you is, how does your organization approach the learning that needs to take place to innovate and be original and groundbreaking enough? And quite often what I've seen in the work that I've done with media organizations is that the response is to run pilots. And pilot projects really don't answer the demands that transmedia raises, because most often pilot projects create an impression of innovation but leave everybody's tomorrow feeling very much like today. In fact, pilots allow people to stay in their comfort zones and feeling safe really in the 20th century world of broadcast TV, and that's exactly the world which is changing. Now, feeling like this, I can imagine you're beginning to think, why is this change taking place and who's done it? And I think that there are two halves to the answer. And one's very, very clearly a new youth audience. You saw the young girl in the video that Nicoletta showed. And this new audience of this new young youth audience is clearly online, and for them, content is not scarce. In fact, it's very abundant. It's a very different situation than just a few generations ago. So in a situation where content is not scarce, it's abundant, it's also very easy to access. These kids are used to having their content everywhere and to having it any time that they want. And we've already got 2 generations of these kids that have been born into a digital world. So you don't find the sort of patience that we had when we were kids, waiting for the next episode of our favorite TV series. And in fact, for these kids, episodes of 15 or 20 or 30 minutes are not natural formats for the television and for the entertainment that they like to consume. So an audience, a change of audience, and a radical change of audience behavior is one part of the question, one part of the answer to the question about why transmedia storytelling is emerging so fast. The second part, and I'm not taking the viewpoint that it's actually a market-driven change, although obviously parts of the market, especially Hollywood, are beginning to pick up on transmedia storytelling. But I think that the second half of the answer is to be found very much in a new generation of professional media makers and storytellers. These young people of 20 to 30 years old are very competent in using digital tools to create compelling content, often on quite small budgets. And they've also got enough understanding and information on the web to see that the business models of 20th century television and film are largely broken. I've had the opportunity to produce a couple of movies, and I can tell you that I'm not convinced that there's a very good model out there for being able to create profit if you're an independent filmmaker or independent TV maker within the business models which are really available if you're going to stay within the business windowing and so forth that we now have. So these kids are looking at new ways to work together, creating new opportunities and new business. And I think that taking the scale of these 2 changes together, of new audience appetites and new media makers, we would have to be very resistant to not see that it would be surprising if storytelling didn't change and if the formats of film and TV didn't change with them. And in fact, I'd like to ask you to just take a little thought experiment with me and to consider maybe one of the flagship series that you're involved with, which are airing at the moment for youth, and to imagine, to envision extending that format across the windows that your youth market are interested to consume and interact with their media. So I'm talking about desktop PCs and internet browsers, smartphones, video game consoles, iApps, and a whole host of new, yet to be realized social, story and gaming platforms. And I'd ask you to see that it's more fun to allow this audience to experience your stories in new ways, to experiment and to move through a story world rather than just repeating the episodes that you've shown on TV or even telling the same main stories. And this is what transmedia is all about. This is about telling stories across the windows and platforms that your audience want to go to. This is what the audience wants, and this is clearly what your challenges as providers of story and documentaries and current affairs. So if we're going to produce for any new media or any emergent technology or any audience-driven change, the challenge has to be how to embrace that in a spirit of discovery and excitement, to do something unique to the history of your company and to the talents and competencies that you have within your company, within the company and within the network. And it's scary stuff, I can imagine, for people that are running major companies, because it puts you in a situation of entering on a quite radical path where you're having to question a number of cherished ideas that you have about production, pipelines, story, audience, and markets. And the good news is that a lot of the creative talent that you need to do that is likely to be inside your own company at the moment. These are people that are probably asking difficult questions about the nature of storytelling. They're pushing projects which look difficult for TV. They're talking about online narratives or live alternate reality events or locative theatre. They're probably not your normal corporate employees. In fact, we could call them misfits, and I would say enable those misfits and let them explore these tomorrows. In fact, I would say create an environment for them where things are possible and try and attract more of them, and realize that these kind of people need to value play as a way to learn. And you should create those kind of playful learning environments for the people that are going to be able to work with these new technologies with you, but marry that with a sense of responsibility and targets and an expectation of excellence. And I would take an example of one of the better known of these type of people and quote Guillermo Del Toro. He said something recently during the Toronto Film Festival which I think highlights the kind of approach that I'm trying to point to here. He said, I want to learn animation, I want to learn to make video games, I want to learn book publishing, and I want to learn TV. Why? Because as a storyteller, I'm convinced that we're going to need to know all of that. I think transmedia is going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen for all things. There will be films that will be films and games that will be games. But more and more, things are going to be permeable. And I love that little expression of being permeable. It's not something which I'd heard related to transmedia before, but it shows his own sense. And in fact, what this demonstrates is that Del Toro has committed to learning these new skills and knowledge for his craft as storyteller. And it demonstrates a creative focus and concentration, which I think many of the managers of the broadcast companies which are here today would love to discover in their creative staff. So I'm suggesting that this is a way to prime your organization for a successful shift to transmedia storytelling. But that doesn't really take account of the part of the world which is outside of your influence. And what's very clear is that no one can tell you what the media landscape is going to look like in 3 or 4 years' time. Facebook games are only 24 months old, and they've already captured 200 million players. Twitter is less than 3 years old, and YouTube has only been around for 5 years. So how do you think of the future if you can't depend on knowing anything about the dominant media platforms which are around at the time that you're trying to produce for? And I would say the way to do that is to promote a culture of being agile and open and responsive, and find a team of people that will go out for you to participate, to watch and to listen, and very clearly to create living labs with partners. I would say that it's really essential to experiment, and then to find ways to adopt and integrate the results of your experiments into a number of series and formats, but then to develop these as transmedia story worlds. And I'd ask you to imagine that what would have been able to happen if you'd have been prepared enough to be able to work with iPhone, mobile apps or Facebook games as they emerged, and to integrate one of these as a central element in a new format with television at its core. I think if you'd been able to do that as a company, your company would have been able to position as a forward-looking, innovative company within your national market, but also within international co-production environments. So, as this is Dare to Educate, I'd like to just sum up a few things about if I have a style of teaching, what that is. I spend around about 40 to 60 days a year teaching, or actually in learning situations with media students. And I think that the clearest way to talk about the way that I teach is very close to a kind of a personal applied research. I get involved with a lot of student-based work because it's a very good way for me to learn as a creative producer. And I fashioned something which I call learning without safety nets, which is really taking teams of multi-talented media students and engaging with content innovators in partner companies in live projects, and with this explicit agreement with the partners that these teams have always got the right to fail. Now, I keep in touch with a lot of the students that I have worked with over the years, and one of those from the original group that I talked to you about from the interaction design course, a young guy called Bas Ording, after he'd finished his degree course about 15 years ago, went to work for Apple in their human interface research team. And I met Bas a couple of years ago, and with great pride and satisfaction, I have to skip past one, he explained to me that he'd been the inventor of the new single-finger swipe on the iPhone and iPad. Actually, he called it momentum scrolling with rubber banding at either end. But to me, what was really deep about it was that he'd invented a new human gesture, which now already is as well known as this or this, only those are quite culturally bound gestures, and his is one which is beginning to spread across the world. And I think that's quite profound. And I believe that some of the students that at the moment are working on transmedia storytelling projects are most likely to also create parts of a new grammar of storytelling which will enter our global way of telling stories. And I'm very pleased to be involved with a lot of these projects. So I'd leave you with one last thought, and that is that around the same time as Thomas asked me about why trees go black at night, he also innocently one day asked me, "Dad, why does the moon rise on one side of our house one night and on the other side of the house the next night?" And I was surprised, first of all, to think that that might be so. So I stepped back and I took a look for a couple of days, and it was. And I really had no idea. And the best that I could say to Thomas was, you know, I really don't know, but I'll do my best to find out. And actually, it started me on a long period of research, which launched quite a complex interactive media project at the time. But what it, for me, you know, what it really comes down to is to be okay with difficult questions. And in fact, I would say, welcome questions that you can't answer today. Thank you.